evening and welcome to Tuesday Folk People. My name is Maddie Leadham, and this evening we have a very special guest joining us for this Tuesday Folk People session, the one and only Ray Cooper. For 24 years, Ray was a member of the award-winning band Oysterband, releasing 19 albums and touring in 27 countries, as well as being named one of the 3 icons of folk. Not only that, Ray has since built up a reputation as a formidable songwriter, releasing 5 albums, with his most recent album, Land of Heroes, released in 2021. Filled with Ray's signature cello, mandolin, guitar, and piano, his unique exploration of folk music takes him from Britain to Scandinavia and all places in between. For the next hour, Ray is going to give us an exclusive insight into his musical life, along with never-seen-before musical performances. I'm really excited to get started on this one, so let's now welcome Ray Cooper to our online studio. Hello, Ray. How are you doing?
Hello, Maddie. I'm very well, thank you.
Excellent. Whereabouts are you right now?
I'm in North Yorkshire in a town called Barlick, which is spelt Bartholdswick, just to confuse Southerners.
The classic English spelling. Oh, it looks really nice, the area that you're in right now. It's very nice. Because you usually live in Sweden. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I've been there for a long time. I love Sweden.
Yeah, we haven't actually had anyone on Tuesday Folk People before who's been from Sweden or lives in Sweden or anything like that. So it's really exciting. And definitely at some point in the interview, we're going to talk a bit about Sweden and find out a bit more about that. But for now, I think that it would be a really good idea to have our first song, so people can really get to hear what you're about or rehear you, because I'm sure a lot of people have already heard you before. So this first song is We Need More Heroes. Can you tell us about it before we hear it?
Well, yeah. On this album, the album's called Land of Heroes, and I explored different kind of modern day heroes. But actually, this particular song is more like a traditional kind of hero, and I must admit it was partly inspired by the work of an English singer-songwriter called William Shakespeare.
You're like a statue, white and cold as stone. We can talk, you and I, now we're alone. And you can help me listen this last time. You're always a friend of mine. I've been a soldier, and a soldier I remain. I slept with one eye open to the wind and the rain. I confess that I forgot you as I played my part. I never knew you'd be that shooting star. You hesitated and you tried to break free, but you couldn't escape the hands of cold destiny. Prince of hope you are, for justice bold. You're a story now that must be told. We give so little in return, but in our hearts your light still burns. And it's a destiny of rain and snow to fall, and it's a destiny of sharp-eyed hawks to fly, and shooting stars to blaze and die. And shooting stars will blaze and die. The restless spirit chasing dreams, that part of you will never die. We pick up your fine dreams and run them with our own. You're a story now that must go on. Farewell, friend, I have work to do, and where you've gone I can't follow you. We living must get up and toil with the sun. We have our tasks and there's work to be done, but in our hearts your light still burns. We need more heroes, and this world still turns. We need more heroes. wanted you and promised to remember you. You never wanted to be king. Your fate's to fall just when you win. You walk that long and lonely road. You faced your fate that day alone. You never wanted to be king. Your fate's to fall. But in our hearts your light still burns. We need more heroes, and this world still turns. We need more heroes.
So you've achieved a lot as a musician throughout your musical career, but I really want to go back to the very beginning and see how it all began. How did you become the Ray Cooper that you are today?
Well, I grew up listening to, music on the TV and the radio that I hated, just terrible music. And then I discovered blues and folk rock, and that sort of opened a whole new door to me. But I played different kinds of music. I've been a bass guitarist in a lot of bands, and I played with Oysterband for many years. And I gradually introduced the cello as a second instrument. And then in the studio, I found myself playing other instruments like mandolin and harmonica, sometimes keyboards. And I went solo in 2012, and I've since recorded 4 solo albums. And most of them I play all the instruments myself. And I've got a little studio in an old log cabin in my garden in Sweden. So I've managed to get a sort of self-sufficient, independent musical life, which I appreciate a lot, because it's not easy really. And I'm quite happy with the way things are going, really. I think
Yeah.
I'm making progress slowly.
Yeah, well, that log cabin in your garden sounds like the most ideal thing for any musician.
Mm,
So everyone's really jealous of that. But so you, as you said, you did a lot of different genres. I think
mm,
punk, rock, all
yeah.
sorts.
Mm.
What was it about folk music that really drew you to it?
The first sort of folk rock albums I heard were by people like Fairport Convention, and maybe you can include in that some of the American acts like the Byrds and Neil Young, people that had one foot in folk and one foot in rock. And I don't know, there's something about traditional, the feeling of traditional tunes and songs that's just so strong for me. And actually, rock and roll is actually based on folk music as well. A lot of that's where it came from, really. It was all, and folk music just means popular music. That's literally what it means. But of course, there's lots of different takes on it. But there's something particularly, also something particularly European about a lot of my influences. I got Swedish folk influences now, as well as Scottish and Irish ones. I'm half Scottish and also partly Irish too. But there's something I just recognize about the folk music that I heard, that it took me ages to get around to actually playing it, actually. I didn't really have an in. I didn't have a door that led into it, but I always knew it was there, and I always liked it, really. I didn't always like the way it was presented, but I always liked the actual music.
Yeah, and you said that you find the strength in the traditional songs and things. Do you find that in your own songwriting you try to kind of evoke that feeling that you get in the traditional music?
Um, I don't, not so much that I try and evoke it, but it influences me, and I like to have that influence there. So if I feel, that sort of thing hovering around me, I welcome it in.
Mm.
I like to keep my music a bit folky.
Yeah.
It gives it a kind of root and a kind of center, really.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed listening to your music that I see parallels in is the storytelling aspect. You're very
Yes.
good at telling a story, and I think that that's really fits you into that folk genre idiom.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, in my live performances, I do quite a lot of spoken word
Yeah.
about because I write songs about fairly obscure subjects, and I think they need a bit of explanation. But I found that people really like stories, being spoken word stories, and particularly if I'm playing to a sit down audience,
Yeah.
they seem to be able to take more of it without getting bored or restless. So I'm definitely going to explore that. In fact, I've never been to a storytelling festival or anything like that, but I think I'd be quite interested to, explore that aspect even more, really.
Yeah. In that sense, do you find that seeing as you do like these obscure subjects and the stories, which could questionably take a bit more concentration from the listener, it's not just background noise, you really need to immerse yourself in it. Do you find then that your music is better received by a folk audience than other genre audiences?
Well, I think it's got a fairly broad appeal, but if people are coming out to hear a thumping beat, maybe they be, it's not quite like that. Although I do have a thumping beat. I've got a drum machine on some of my songs. Um, it doesn't have to be a folk audience, because I play to quite a wide range of audiences.
Yeah.
And obviously, if I'm playing to a stand-up audience in a club or at a festival, I'll cut the stories really short and tailor the set a little bit towards, hopefully what they might like.
Brilliant. Well, the other thing you mentioned were your instruments, and you are very proficient multi-instrumentalist. What is it with the cello, the mandolin, guitar, piano? I'm not sure if there's any more, but that's, as it is already, that's quite a wide array of instruments. And then one that I really wanted to focus on was the cello.
Yeah.
So as you said, you've really brought it into your music as you've gone on. And I see it quite a lot in the folk scene currently. I see it's in a lot of modern folk bands and artists at the moment. Was it always like this? When you began, were there many cellists around at that point?
No, not really. I've seen it grow over the last 20 years in folk and in pop music. And that's great. It's actually a very versatile instrument, particularly to accompany a small acoustic group. And I was really inspired by the way the Beatles used the cello, actually, in some of their songs like I'm a Walrus and Eleanor Rigby. And then seeing how it was used in film music, sitting in a cinema, listening to it really loud on big speakers. I thought cello was a really fantastic instrument, very powerful.
And is that why you think that potentially it's become so popular now?
Yeah, I don't know why it's become so popular now as opposed to before, but I think it always had that potential, actually. That's why I started learning a long time ago. I started learning cello when I was 21. I didn't learn as a child. It was a sort of conscious thing. I wasn't forced into it by my parents, like so many people were. I started on bass guitar and guitar, but I thought it had a real potential. But it took a long time of learning it before I could actually use it.
Yeah, that's the one thing with trying to learn as an adult. You're not quite the sponge that you were when you were a child. But I mean, if that's not inspiration for someone to get learning now, because it's never too late, I think that it's brilliant. And do you have any plans to add any other instruments to your repertoire?
Well, I got hold of a 12-string guitar last year, and I've been developing that. I'm going to take that on my next tour of Denmark in April. That's quite exciting. And on all my albums, I play this Finnish harp called a kantele. And people say, "Oh, why don't you take that on tour?" Well, maybe in the distant future when I got more room in the car or the van and more time to develop it. But the more instruments you have, the less time you have to play any of them.
Yeah.
And you have to maintain them, keep them in tune, change the strings, and it becomes, in the end, you just spend your whole time fiddling with them instead of writing songs. So it's sort of reached more or less a finite border, I think. I hope so.
Yeah, to be honest, I think it is enough. I don't think that anyone's thinking you need more. But am I right in saying that you were a session musician before you?
No, I was never a session musician, but I did get a few sessions, particularly on cello, because people want, there are not so many cellists that around, I suppose. or a lot of people can play various instruments but not a cello. In fact, the people here next door are making a charity record with lots of rock stars on it, and I did 2 songs for them just before I left in my own studio. Two cello piece, cello string section pieces for them. So it's just the odd people that want cello that I do sessions for, really.
Yeah. Well, I think
And I can
it's
do
time.
it.
Oh, sorry.
So no, carry on.
I think it's time that we have our second song now.
Mm.
Before we talk a little bit more about what you've done and what you've got coming up. So the second song is Eyes of Mercy.
Ah, yeah.
And it's quite appropriate for the current time, isn't it? Can you tell us what this song is about?
Well, when the COVID epidemic really broke in the spring of late winter of 2020, I had to abandon my tour in England because they were stopping all the flights. And I was reading in the papers about the nurses being overworked and the doctors, and also about people lying in hospital that could hardly breathe and couldn't move. And I just imagined what it's like to be lying in a hospital bed when you can't move, and you hear the nurses coming, and you just see their eyes because they're wearing a mask. And yeah, that's. In fact, we were staying last night with some doctors, and they said, "Oh, you must have had COVID to know what it feels like." Well, I think just reading that in the paper and remembering some hospital dramas I've seen in the past was enough to imagine the picture of lying in bed.
I hear you coming from the rustle of your clothes, the sound of plastic slippers on a polished floor. Check the signs, read the charts down the line, and then check mine. I can't turn my head, but I hear what you said. I wish I could answer just fine. I want to breathe, I want to breathe. How long have I been here? Hours turn to days. There's an angel by my bedside with a covered face. I'll try to be your small success, and I hope you make it too. Eyes wide awake, night and day, tired eyes that watch for signs. Stay a while, lead me through to the front door or to the back. Lead me through to the light or to the black. I need someone to hear my tale, or it will stay with me. This one needs to run, it wants someone to set it free. It's only when the days are short I see the course I've run. It's only when I start the race I saw that long ago I'd won. Goodbye to the past, and if the flames leave just us, those who make it through will remember you and thank the few. Eyes of mercy, tired eyes of angels by my side, stay a while. Eyes that work night and day, eyes that watch, eyes that pray, stay a while. Eyes of mercy, tired eyes, stay a while. stay a while.
One thing that you are extremely well known for is your time in Oysterband. What was it, 24 years or
I
something?
think so. I think
Playing.
so. Yeah.
And Oysterband, I mean, multi-award winning folk band, toured in something like 27 countries, 19 albums,
Mm,
something like that.
mm.
And how did you even begin to, or how did you get into Oysterband in the first place? How did that come about?
Well, in the 80s, I tried to run my own band for a while with a couple of African guys, and it didn't really work out. And went through a really low period. And then, in fact, I never thought I'd go back to playing bass guitar again. And then this opportunity came up to join Oysterband, and they had it was a good regular job. They had a lot of touring. They were going to America regularly, and they're making albums regularly. And I liked the music, and it was my first introduction to real folk music, really, and folk rock. And it was great. I think I learned a lot along the way about record production and live performance, and it was a great performance and great experience. And they're still doing well. They're still together. But there came a point where I needed more independence, and yeah, it was just time to move on, really. But it was a great experience.
How do you think that your experience being in the band helps you develop as a musician?
Oh, loads. Just by playing regularly, for a start, having regular work, regular gigs, and regular recording. Recording's really important, I think, to develop as a musician. And then the experience of working with different producers as well, and co-writing, experience of co-writing with people, and a lot of the work I did was co-arranging rather than co-writing. So I learned a lot about arranging things.
Hmm. So it was really kind of
Mm.
your proper professional music education, would you say,
It
being?
was, it was really, yeah, a big part of it, yeah.
Yeah. I bet you have a lot of stories from your time for 24 years.
Yeah,
It's been a lot
got a
happened.
few.
What would you say was the best experience that you ever had while you were in the band?
Oh, the best experience was playing on the later show with Jules Holland,
Oh, really?
because it was, you're surrounded by great musicians. The songwriter Jimmy Webb was right next to me for 2 days on his piano, because they have lots of small stages all in a circle, and a very professional film crew. They were just fantastic. The production crew were amazing, and just to be part of something at that level. And we were appearing with June Tabor, singing with us, and it just went like clockwork. That was so far the high point.
Yeah. Would you say that at that point you were like, yes, I've made it. I'm here.
No, I didn't think like that. I just enjoyed it. I was just swimming in a great pool.
Yeah, sounds amazing. So then obviously you
Mm,
said that you needed that independence and
mm,
you left to become an independent artist.
mm.
Um, how was that? Was that quite a difficult decision to make, to go from being in the camaraderie of a band to being completely alone in the music world?
Yeah, it was extremely difficult. It was extremely difficult because, for lots of reasons, I love the band, but it also got to the point where I had kids that were growing up, and I needed to have a bit more time at home. And I couldn't. I was imposing on them, saying I couldn't do longer tours and I couldn't do tours back to back. And it got to a point where my family really needed me more than the band did,
Yeah,
and that gave me a bit of space, really. And then I could order my own tours, and I didn't have to play in big places. I could play house concerts and things like that. And I did a lot of that because I needed a lot of experience as a solo artist,
yeah.
a solo performer. So I did a lot of house concerts, and yeah, it kind of worked in the end.
Well, definitely. I mean,
Mm,
we can see
mm,
today with all of your songs and things that you've
mm,
obviously worked it out as an
mm,
independent artist, and it just shows that you offer a different thing to what you offered when you were
mm,
in Oysterband. Because I was
mm.
actually going to ask, you moved to Sweden while you were still in Oysterband. How did that
Yeah.
work? How did you manage to maintain going in the band?
Well, It wasn't very difficult actually, because when we go on tour, we all meet at Gatwick Airport or wherever it is, or a rehearsal room in London, and we get into a van. And then 3 weeks later, you get out the van and everybody goes home. So it wouldn't take me any longer to fly back from Stansted than it would for the singer to get back to his house in Wales.
Yeah. Oh,
The only thing that was a bit more time consuming was festivals. So we're doing festivals nearly every weekend in the summer, and I'd have to fly a day early to England just to fly out to Spain or somewhere, and that got a bit tedious.
yeah.
But when we wrote, we'd rent a house and write for a few days together, or rehearse, or we were in the studio. So it didn't make as much difference as you'd think. It was quite smooth, really.
Yeah. So moving to being a solo artist gave you a lot more time and things. How did it
Mm.
affect you musically? Did you find that your musical style or musical techniques and things suddenly changed?
Yes, they did change because a band hones its own kind of musical direction and style, and it's very difficult to kind of step out of it. But when I was doing my own work, I could set the boundaries really and my boundaries are very wide, as I expect you've heard. So I could take much more risks, and that's really exciting because all the risks I take, um, I think maybe I have a song that I think, oh, that's just too different. People like it, so um, that kind of freedom is really productive, actually.
Yeah. Well, we can see that what this freedom's produced in your latest album, Land of
Mm,
Heroes, which all the songs that
mm,
we've got today, they're all from that album.
mm.
That's right, isn't it? Yeah. So, can you tell us about this album? What is it about? What are the threads and things that you explore throughout it?
Well, I explore loosely. I explore the theme of heroes. What I've done with all my albums, I've always recorded more songs than I need, and then try to sort of hone the direction and maybe write one or two more so that there's some kind of theme going on. And in this one, it was the theme of heroes. So I looked at who are the different kinds of heroes, and well, one of them is the nurses and the doctors that I mentioned. Another is the whistleblowers. Thinking of people like Chelsea Manning and Catherine Gunn, and the foreign journalists. That's another kind of hero. So that was a theory, a theme, and then I tried to give it a musical. I sort of restricted the sounds on the album. I used the harmonium quite a lot. I've got a harmonium in my studio, and I used the cantilé a bit more. There's also a little Finnish thread running through the album because I married into a Finnish family in Sweden. I've got a lot of Finnish influences, and I played the cantilé as a little sort of frosting on the top of a lot of the songs. That's another kind of thread, and the title of the album, Land of Heroes, is the subtitle of one English translation of a Finnish epic poem called the Kalevala. So there's a kind of Finnish thread through. There's an organic acoustic music thread. There's a heroes thread, and there's a kind of Finnish thread, and they're all kind of. I think they all complement each other.
Mm.
I hope so.
It's very unique. Even the
Mm,
subject matter, really. I don't know if
mm.
I've heard an album that covers that. But would you say that all of the heroes that you've got in there are your personal heroes? So it's
Yeah,
like a
mm. Yeah,
almost like
they are
a foundation. Yeah.
because I mean, the word hero really originally meant the central character in a story. And to that extent, everybody is the hero of their own story. But the words come to mean something else. And for me, it means people that put the welfare of others above their own and have courage to, help others and do things for other people, sometimes at their own risk. And that's why I included people like the whistleblowers and the foreign journalists
Yeah.
and the nurses and doctors. Yeah.
No, 100%. And another interesting thing about the album is we covered a bit with COVID in Eyes of Mercy, but
Mm.
COVID actually, there's like a silver lining to the cloud of the pandemic in that it really helped you create this album. Have I got that right?
Yes, it did. It gave me a lot more time because I had to cancel my tour in the summer last year in the UK because of all the quarantine things. And so I had more time to record, and that actually gave me time to write one or two more songs. And then I had loads of time to get the sequence of the order of the album right, because once you record all these songs, you don't know which order they should be in, and it actually influences the listening experience a lot.
Yeah.
And I went through 17 different orders over 2 months, and I collaborate with a producer called Al Scott in Brighton. He does my mixing and also gives me very good sort of executive production advice. And we went through 17 orders, and I'm really happy with the order that I got. And I would have only have had that because of, I couldn't tour so much, and I had the extra time to do it.
So it was awful, but it did provide that creative time for you to really just have deadlines, not pressures, just let the music work as it needed. Absolutely brilliant. And I think that now we should hear our third song, have another song from this. And as you mentioned before, Whistleblowers, and that is what this song is. Can you tell us any more about it?
Well, I wrote this song in a very different way. People say, oh, how do you write a song? Well, I can tell you how I wrote a specific song, but I can't generalize because they're all written in different ways. But I had all these jottings and rants on my phone and on my computer, and I put them all together in a word processing thing. Got rid of some of it, but it was still pages long. And I was on tour in Germany, and I copied and pasted it into an email, sent it to myself so it appeared on my phone, and then I copied and pasted it into a message. So that meant I could listen back. It would, Siri or whoever it is in my phone that speaks, could speak all these jumble of words without any punctuation, just like a sort of, it sounded like garbage really. But I listened to it when I was driving on the Autobahn, and I realized bits of it could be made into a song. So I stopped and edited it on the phone, and then got back in the car and listened to it again. And by the time I reached my destination, I just had to go to the computer and write it out again, and I had the lyrics, and I still had no tune, which is why it's kind of half spoken.
Blow, blow, blow the whistle, blow. There's nowhere else to go. Locked up in a safe house, safe but not forever. No going back now, no, not now, not ever. Your old life is over, you'll never live a life in clover. It's showtime, go time, press enter, blow the storm and you're the center. Don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot the messenger. This time you put yourself outside the pale. Maybe spend a life in jail or exile in a foreign land, getting emails from your biggest fan. She shines a light in darkened corners, naming, shaming hidden forces, willing to withstand the wrath and tread a very, very narrow path. It's a story, a slow burner. She's a witness, a stone turner. But what is she supposed to do with the evidence of murder? Flashbulb moment can reveal the hidden forces and the secret deals, and the wheels within wheels within wheels. Computer needs a new user, we need a new Martin Luther, willing to commit offences, to see and understand the consequences. Black vest, black blood, black earth, black streets, black gold, black death, black meat, black teeth, black sky, black eyes, black cloud, black mind, black days, black thoughts, black fire, black sun, and black water. Journalist is on the phone, filing copy to a desk back home. A necessary witness to the truth, a saint or a sinner, a loser or a winner, a hero or a fool, but it's the job somebody's got to do. It's a story, a slow burner, she's a witness, a stone turner. What is she supposed to do with the evidence to murder? Don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot, don't shoot the messenger. Don't shoot, don't shoot.
So, as well as Land of Heroes, you've released three other albums, four in total. And they are Tales of Love, War and Death by Hanging, Palace of Tears, and Between the Golden Age and Promised Land. How do all of these albums differ, or do they all kind of follow the same structure, idea, all that sort of thing?
Well, no, they are very different, actually. The first one, I was very unsure of myself because I'd never done it before. And I really created a kind of character. I started off with photos for the album cover, and then I tried to make the music that suited the photos. I wanted to really have a strong kind of image. And the first album's got a very historical theme. And I also used, I had the help of a very good Swedish violin player. So there's quite a lot of Nordic sounding fiddle on it. And there's about 3 folk songs, I think, on it, or at least 2 anyway. And yeah, 2 Scottish ones. And some of the songs are very historical. They're about historical events, old battles and things like that. And it worked really well, but I didn't want to repeat it. So when the second album came along, Palace of Tears, that was more like about 20th century history and about my own personal history. So there's a song about the Berlin Wall, because I used to play in the DDR with the Oysterband, and when it was still communist, I had a lot, and I still got very good connections with East Germany. And there's a song about Hamburg, and I tried to make it a real singer-songwriter album, not have any folk songs deliberately, and make it a bit more contemporary. And then the third album, Between the Golden Age and the Promised Land, explores this theme that people think, things always used to be better, or they're going to get better. These two, like we're always between the Golden Age and the Promised Land. And so there's a song about the boat migrants in the Mediterranean, and yeah, there's romantic songs. There's a song about Venice, and I don't know, I haven't seen the cover for a while, actually. I can't. There's a song about, and I tried to make it a bit brighter as well, a bit of a sort of brighter sound, and then the new one, as you say, is, as we were talking about, is different again.
Yeah. So the fact that
I think they're all.
Sorry, carry on.
I think they're all recognizably me, though. I can't get rid of that.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Do you think that because they're all different and they're all so unique, tell me if I'm talking a load of rubbish here, but do you think that they could potentially reflect who you are and your stances on things at the time and how you grow as a person, and each album reflects that with how different it is?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I think that's what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a favourite?
Well, the first album has a kind of intensity and a magic that it's difficult to match, actually. A lot of people still like the first album best. But that was then, and now I'm doing the best I can. And this album's actually had more more sort of plaudits than any of the other ones. I got nominated in the German Music Critics Prize in the folk and singer-songwriter category, which I've never had before. So I think I'm still developing, and I'm getting a little bit looser with things. And my next album, I want to get a bit looser still, less sort of pinned down. I can't really explain it, but I want the music to flow a little bit more.
So it'll be different yet again, another different album.
It'll certainly be different. Yeah, 'cause I don't like it. Doesn't actually work when you try and copy something. Even songwriting methods, I think, oh, that worked for that song, and I try and do it again. It doesn't work. I have to find another method all the time.
So moving on to something slightly different now, I find quite interesting. You said earlier you're half Scottish, part Irish. You obviously live in Sweden, and you're married to a Finnish family. So there's lots of connections from all these different places. And you've written on your website that you don't have a hometown per
No.
se. How do you think that affects your music, not having that sense of foundation that you would have if you were from one particular place?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, it's made me who I am, and I think, when you create anything really, as a songwriter, you're kind of exploring who you are in a way. So I guess if I was, there's plenty of great songwriters that come from one place. Neil Young comes from Winnipeg, and yeah, I come from a number of places. I guess you're dealt a set of cards, and you make what you can of them. Some people are lucky enough to be born in the right place at the right time, and that's obviously an advantage. But I think I've been very lucky with what I've had. Really, I think I had enough idea about music early on to sort of chase the right things, even if I never reached them. If that
Would you
makes
say
sense.
potentially there's like a sense of identity running through all your songs? Obviously, you said that there's Scandinavian influences in your last album,
Mm.
and in your first one, there's some traditional songs and things like that. So, do
Mm.
you think that in some way that's you bringing your roots into it, all of these varied
Yeah,
parts of you?
I think it is, and also the music that I first liked. The kind of early folk rock from America, particularly Johnny Cash, Neil Young. I think that kind of influence is all there in the way I sing, probably, and yeah, the kind of chords I use.
Yeah. Now, as I said at the beginning of the interview, it's very exciting that we've got you here, not just because you are Ray Cooper, but also because you have this unique insight into the Swedish folk scene. And so, firstly, I just want to ask, how is it different to the British folk scene?
It's different in various ways. The Swedish folk scene is very important to the Swedish national identity. So those, as it is in Ireland, for example, but not so much in England, although it's getting a bit better in England now. But in Sweden, to be a very good violin player, you could do a test and get a medal, and then you were expected to be a teacher. It's called a riksspelman, a state player, and so it's very much linked with that, and it's always been very well supported. So there are a lot of music schools teaching people how to play folk fiddle. In England, that's just beginning. There's been this one in Newcastle that I suppose it's been going about 20 years, 25 years now, but it's still comparatively recent. So the folk musicians that are turned out are very well trained. They're not necessarily very individual, but they have fabulous playing ability. So there's lots of really great players. But going back a little further, the folk dance tradition was very, very big and very popular because it was a very rural economy, very rural sort of population for a very, very long time, even up until living memory. For example, I've met a man who told me his father was sold at an auction as a farm labourer.
What? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it wasn't very sort of the communications with the outside world at the beginning, even at the beginning of the 20th century, were not very strong. So folk dancing and local folk musicians, it was incredibly strong. Every single village had a dance every single week.
Yeah.
And for example, my village 2000 in Sweden. It's called Malmköping. We have an archive that was collected at the end of the 1800s, and the musicologist only collected fiddle tunes from the county, and there are 6,000 tunes in the archive just from the county. So it was a very, very rich history of music, with influences from Britain, from Germany, from Russia, Finland, and Norway.
Wow.
And it's regional too. It's different in different regions.
Yeah. So would you say that it is a bit more, it's a bit more important potentially for the people there than it is
Yeah,
here?
I think it was particularly in the 1970s. It's tailed off now. There's less interest, you know. Now kids have got TikTok and Facebook and stuff,
Yeah.
and folk dancing is really the only popular kind of folk dancing now. Is a resurgence of the very old sling polska dance, which is actually my favorite kind of tune as well.
Yeah.
And dance.
And how is your music received there?
I think with amused interest. But you know, they don't really. Unfortunately, there are very few live gigs in Sweden, and very, very few singer-songwriters. So most people that get up on a stage with a guitar are going to play cover versions, and
Yeah.
they've never come across anybody writing their own songs. The gigs I play. So I'm a kind of curiosity, and they don't understand how I earn my living.
I think that's unless you're a musician, I think that's universal. No one understands how musicians earn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Um,
And what's your job?
yeah, exactly. That surprises me though that you say there's not a lot of live
No,
and stuff. And if,
no, it's
especially if it's
terrible.
important, how do they then
Mm.
do a lot of the folk music if they're not
Well,
actually?
the folk music. Each county's got its own folk music organisation. I'm a member of my own one, and they have an annual meeting where they have a lot of jam sessions. And then there are folk festivals, which are mostly attended by musicians. And they have campsites where they just play all night, and they take it in turns to play on a dance stage. But they're all playing the tunes they've been taught in music schools, so it's very different. It's a bit weird, but there are some great players and a wonderful repertoire of tunes. I mean, some of them I've used in my music, and some of them I've snuck in there. Sometimes I've more often actually tried to write in their style.
Hmm. How wonderful to be able to have such close access to two very different folk scenes and kind of dip in
Mm.
and out of both of them. That must be really nice as a musician.
It's very inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anyway, we are sadly running out of time. So there's
Mm.
one more thing that I really want to look at now,
Mm-hmm.
and that is what you've got in the future. I mean,
Mm.
so you've just finished a tour
Mm.
of your latest album, and have
Mm.
you got anything else coming up that people should know about?
Well, I'm touring in Denmark in uh, uh, April, then May in Germany, and July I'm coming back to England. I'm playing the Rhythm Tree Festival of the Isle of Wight and the Ely Folk Festival, and I've got a few other shows. People can find out about the gigs on my website, which is raycooper.org. I haven't actually got those dates up there yet, but I've got about a week and a half in July, and then I've got another tour in Germany in September, and then in April next year I'm coming back to England for another tour, and hopefully going back to Canada later next year as well. I had a tour in Canada at the beginning of 2020. That's a very nice place to visit and tour as well. So I've got a few places that I can play.
Yeah, amazing. A very busy schedule.
Mm.
Ed,
And I'm about halfway through writing the next album, but I got
that's
a lot more work to do on that.
that's what I was going to ask. How are you going to find
Mm.
the time
Mm.
to even get your fifth
Well,
album out
that
on this?
that is a problem when you're touring a lot.
Yeah,
It really only happens when I've got long periods of time at home.
yeah,
But I'm in no hurry to release another album. You know, it can wait, and it's got to be different from the other ones.
Yeah.
And next one will be very different.
I'm
Can
very
guarantee
excited.
that.
You like to keep
Mm.
the audience on their toes, not knowing what's to
Mm.
come and guessing. So that's brilliant. Okay, well, fantastic. As I said, we have unfortunately run out of time, but we do have time for one more song, luckily. Just before you tell us about this final song, I just want to say a huge thank you for joining us here and for chatting to us while you're on tour, because you've recorded this obviously while you are still on tour right now. So thank you very much for that. And your final song, Circles, can you tell us about this one before we hear it?
Yeah, I had a friend, Jürgen, who booked some of my tours in the eastern part of Germany, and he booked me into a lot of churches and castles and monasteries, which was amazing. I found out after the first tour he was actually a priest, so he had a certain advantage in booking me into churches. And we had a lot of fun, and he booked several tours, but he died suddenly a few years back. And I was just, trying to make sense of something when a friend dies. You can't make sense of it really, but that's where the song came from.
In circles on the earth, with the sun, the big sky, and the birds. With friends we meet along the way. Some will come and some will stay. The things I miss about you now, your light, your laughing, and your smile. Left behind an open space, an empty place. Seagulls are crying every day. Sometimes I think I hear them call your name, but there's no answer to their call. Some will come and some will fall. In the snow, back to where we started it all. Then we left our different ways. Some will come and some will stay. If there's a heaven, you will know that's where you surely will go. You stepped lightly on the ground, and lightly you did go. Seagulls are crying every day. Sometimes I think I hear them call your name, but there's no answer to their call. Some will come and some will fall. Call your name up at the sky. The birds shout back and cry. There's no answer here below. Some will come and some will go. I walked up to the mountain top and gazed across the sea, where the endless green waves had once spoken to me. Seagulls are crying every day. Sometimes I think I hear them call your name, but there's no answer to their call. Some will come and some will go. We walk walking circles on the earth, with the sun, the big sky and the birds, with friends we meet along the way. Some will come and some will stay.
Thank you very much for watching. To find out more information about our future Tuesday Folk People sessions, please sign up to our mailing list or keep an eye on our social media and website. Our next session will be a week from today at 8 p.m. See you then.
The raindrops feel like liquid diamonds falling from a cloud.